Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. In this podcast, your host, Lori Amin, will interview published authors to chat about their work, journey to getting published, and their book recommendations. If you share a passion for books and always looking for your next read, then join us. Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast. Today's guest is historical fiction author Fiona Davis. In this episode, we chat about the research process, what it's like to write historical fiction, her latest book, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, and of course, around her book recommendations. Now let's go to the interview. Hi, Fiona. Welcome to the What to Read Next podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So happy to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm very excited.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my parents are both English, and I was born in Canada but raised all over the States. And yeah, I've been a number of things. I've been an actress and then a journalist and now a writer. And you know, each step of the way, it's been very interesting, and I just love what I do now. I have to say, writing historical fiction and meeting fans and other authors has been just an incredible time.
That's amazing. So what was that journey to get that first book published?
Yeah, so, you know, what happened was I'd been working as a journalist for some time, but writing about health and fitness. So, you know, if you needed an article on heartburn or, you know, the latest diet, that's what I was writing. And I was looking for a new apartment in New York City, and my broker took me to the Barbizon 63 condo. Mm-hmm. And it turns out this was the, you know, Barbizon Hotel for Women, and had this amazing history of people like Grace Kelly and Lauren Bacall living there. And I started thinking it would be great to read a book that was set there. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I can see if I can write a book. And I love dual timelines, so I'll do that. If I'd had any idea how hard it is to do that, I would have never tried it. But I'm one of those people that once I start something, I have to see it through. Mm-hmm. And so I just step by step wrote this book, and was lucky enough to get it published and was off on a whole new career.
That's fantastic. So let's talk about your writing process. Are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Do you follow an outline, or do you see where the story leads you?
I am such a plotter. I plan ahead. I always joke around that I'm the daughter of engineers. And so, you know, it's kind of almost a scientific process where I really start with the research, and I research all about whatever location I'll be working in. And then I will come up with the characters. And then I just start imagining what they'll be doing and putting obstacles in their way. And I pretty much plot out and outline the story, so I know what's happening in each chapter. And that's really helpful, because if I'm working on a chapter and I'm kind of stuck or not sure if I'm, you know, in the right place, I know there's a chapter a couple days ahead that I'm really excited to get to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what really propels me to finish the book. And that's what you need, because there's always points when you're writing when you just hit a wall and you're tired of the story and you're tired of the characters. And so for me to outline really carefully helps me get the job done.
And so you write historical fiction, and you tend to write about buildings in New York. So talk to us about the research process for that.
Yeah, sure. So each book, it's been different. Like for the book that's set at Grand Central Terminal, I got a great behind the scenes tour of the terminal, you know, all these different levels and really interesting kind of secret hiding places and rooms. And so for each book, it's been different. For The Lions of Fifth Avenue, I started doing research and just learned some surprising facts about the library. Mm-hmm. And that's what gave me kind of the gateway to enter into a story set there. And the idea, to be honest, came from talking to readers, and the library just kept on coming up as a location. And I decided after a while I have to look into it. And I interview people who are experts in the construction of it and in the history of it, and just get to know it as best I can.
I love it. How do you organize yourself? How do you organize yourself as a writer? How do you keep track of your ideas, inspirations, or the characters?
Yeah, you know, I am the kind of person that I can only think of one thing at a time. I can't multitask. So I don't have other ideas for books going on at the same time. Mm-hmm. I throw myself completely into the research and the writing of whatever book I'm working on. And I use a program called Scrivener. Mm-hmm. And that is so helpful, especially for historical fiction writers, because you can, let's say you're writing and you need to describe a dress that you have a photo of. You can click it and in one click, get the dress right up there, right next to your words.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not, going out of one program and into another or searching through files. It's just so easy to access the visuals or the research that you need as you write. And again, that helps you with momentum.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get lost down a rabbit hole, which is so easy to do if you're looking up things on the internet.
I love it. And do you share your work along the way, or do you wait till it's completed for others to read?
I do it all on my own, and then I do start sharing it after I've been through a few revisions. My first draft is just nonsense. It barely makes any sense. And so it needs a lot of work. And so I wait until it's really ready and then show it to some close friends and then my agent and then eventually the editor. So it's a real process, and it grows every draft. And I do about 10 drafts of revisions, so it changes dramatically.
That's fascinating. So let's talk about, dual timelines, because you do play with those and you mentioned they're hard to do. What do you find difficult? Do you write linearly, like you write from beginning to end, or do you write different places? How do you navigate the dual timelines?
That's such a great question. And it's tricky. What I tend to do is I tend to do the older timeline first.
Okay.
And then the modern timeline second. And because there's an element of mystery in every one of my books, I have to be very careful, because you want to surprise the reader, and you need to drop clues and red herrings as you go along. But if you give away too much in one timeline, it detracts from the other. And so it's this real balancing act that can be so frustrating. But once you get it right, it's really rewarding to be able to have that payoff. And for me as a reader, I love books that surprise me and that there's a big twist. And so for me, the challenge of working those twists into a dual timeline is just well worth the effort.
I love it. I love the fact there's dual timelines, and they're interconnected, but as a reader, you're trying to guess how they're connected, and then you just start finding the clues as you read along. It's a good payoff as a reader.
Good. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
So is it difficult to balance the historical accuracy with modern preferences for readers?
Excuse me. It for me, I don't mind writing in the past, and you do want to make sure you get that right. And there's so many facts to double check, and how did they get around town in the 1913s? Was it a car? Was it a taxi? Was it a horse and carriage? There's all these questions that have to be answered and that have to be right. And so for me, it's finding those details and letting those speak for themselves. So I don't need my characters to speak in some kind of, different language in a sense, like in the 1880s. But I do elevate their speech a little bit. And I think that's all you need to suggest that this is of a different era. And then in the modern timeline, you can let them be more casual. But I think there it helps that my parents are English. And so there's a different way of wording things that I think is helpful for the older timelines to tap into. So I really just hear their voices in my head and start writing.
That's amazing. So let's talk about Lands of Fifth Avenue. The story is based on your public library and revolves around one family and a series of paths in the library. What was the source of inspiration?
Yeah, so the big source of inspiration came as I was doing research about the library, and I learned that when it was built, they included a 7-room apartment deep inside the library for the superintendent and his family to live in. And he lived there with his wife and 3 children for 30 years. And the daughter was actually born in the library.
Really?
Things. Yeah. And the kids used to play baseball using books as bases until they got caught. Like, there were just so many fantastic stories around this life of a family deep within the library. And once I knew that, I knew that I would set it from the point of view of the superintendent's wife, and I made up a new family. And just explore what it would be like to live in a library, which I think is a lot of readers' dreams.
Yeah, I can imagine. I love the New York Public Library. That building is just it's so beautiful. It's magnificent. I would love to live in the library.
Yeah, right? Oh, it'd be amazing.
It's amazing. So let's start with Laura. She's our 1913 timeline. She's a married woman and a mother, and she wants to get back to work or just to be of service. And she goes back to school. What was it important? And she connects with the community of women in this era. What was it important to showcase this part of her journey? As she navigates being, getting outside in the world, outside of her family.
Yeah, so for Laura, she's living in this library and surrounded by all this knowledge, but she really feels stifled. She wants to interact more with the rest of the world. And so she applies to Columbia Journalism in school and gets in. And at that point, it was in its second year and was co-ed. And she suddenly starts seeing a larger picture of New York, and her world is really cracked wide open. And yeah, as she gets involved with this downtown group of women who are very progressive. And for me, it was interesting to show that women in 1913 were talking about a lot of the same things that we're talking about today. Women's rights, the right to vote, even birth control, even free love. Like, they were really what you consider women talking about in the 60s and 70s. And the thought that there was this thing called the new woman in 1910, who was someone who was looking to do more and go a little beyond being, the role of wife and mother. And I thought it'd be fun to create a character who gets caught up in that world and explore what that was like.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see her journey from wife, mother to then just being connected, and then seeing her after the 1913 timeline, how she became well known as an essayist, and she had her own estate. Like, she actually was able to build something out of it. That was amazing.
And at great cost. It wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't easy. She did have a great cost from it. So let's start with Sadie. So Sadie is a librarian who has a connection with Laura, but she hides it from her employer. Why was it important to hide her connection with the former tenants of the library?
Yeah, so Laura Lyons by that point has become a very well-known essayist and feminist writer. And Sadie wants to be known for who she is. And she's a curator and a librarian, and a really good one. And so for me, Sadie is looking to establish her own identity, separate from her grandmother's, and that's why she keeps it a secret. And she's quite successful up to a point.
Yeah, I think it's also fascinating. I think maybe even looking at Pearl's, Laura's daughter's relationship with Laura, and how it affected Sadie, like even the connection, like because Pearl left, England, left her mother, essentially to start her own life, and so she broke free. And so in some ways, like, Sadie may not have felt that huge connection until revisiting it back,
Yeah. It's about. Exactly. It's the ramifications of a decision and how it's passed down through the generations.
Yeah. So there's a connection with the thefts of 1913, 1993, and it was fascinating to see the process of how they addressed them. What was the research process to get this part right, of getting how to investigate the thefts in the library and the whole process?
Yeah. So the theft was based on one that actually occurred at New York, at Columbia University's Butler Library in 1994, where a thief stole $1.8 million of rare books and manuscripts and letters over the course of 3 months. And the people in the library couldn't figure out how he was getting in and out. They couldn't figure it out. And I was able to talk to the head librarian at the time, Jean Ashton, who shared with me what it was like as they were trying to determine who was doing this, and the staff started looking at each other and wondering, how is this happening? The thief was eventually caught, and Jean Ashton went before the judge in the case, and she asked for a harsher sentence. And what she said was that, this man didn't steal like X amount of pages worth X, but he stole a piece of Western history and culture, and that this loss would have this dramatic impact on scholarly research. And she had this, amazing, it's in the transcript, about how libraries are the safekeepers of artifacts of the past. And then they're rediscovered as scholars and things change over time. And so something that wasn't worth much, like women's diaries or records of slave transactions, They might have not been worth much 100 years ago, but as times evolve, thinking has changed, and now they're very valuable. And so Jane Ashton went before this judge and asked for a harsher sentence and explained why. And it was granted. And so to me, she's a real hero of libraries everywhere. And later on, there was a law that counted him for cultural heritage resources that are stolen from museums or libraries. And if that happens, then a harsher sentence is given out. And so again, it was like, why are these items important? And what does it mean when they're lost? And who are the heroes who went to bat to try and save them?
Yeah, I really love the whole idea of looking at the theft and looking at the library as a structure and the process of how do you steal something and the whole how do you get rid, try to sell it, even going to rare books and then the whole savings encounter trying to find the rare books and to be bought, this whole black market world that is for these collectibles that happens every day. And then trying to capture it,
Exactly.
So, what are some of your upcoming projects?
Right now it's just a lot of publicity for the Lions of Fifth Avenue. So a lot of interviews, which is wonderful, and everything's virtual. So, we're doing a lot of Zooming and Facebook Living, which is great. And I'm working on another book now. And we'll see where that goes. And it's another New York City landmark, and I'm excited to see where that goes. But it's early stages, so it's so interesting to have a book that's completed coming out as you're struggling with the first draft of another book. It keeps you very grounded.
I can imagine. I think it's I admire writers who can turn out books and then at the same time still do the publicity and do juggle multiple storylines and keep them straight and remember the characters and remember the settings and all the different things that happen them have happened a year or 2 or 3 years ago.
Exactly. So the publishing process where everything's very drawn out. So I finished that book back in January. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. So now let's go to a round of book recommendations. This is an opportunity for you to share with our audience what they should read next. What is your favorite genre?
Historical fiction, definitely.
Awesome. Who are your favorite authors?
Well, right now I'm reading Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, who is a wonderful book set in Shakespeare's time. Another English author who I love and have been raving about this book is The Daughters of Foxcote Manor by Eve Chase. And that's historical fiction in a few timelines and a setting of this crumbling old English mansion. And so that, of course, is just prime for me. I love The Book of Lost Names by Kristen Harmel. Beautiful World War II historical fiction. The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dare is just so unique and sweeps you away. And so those are the ones that I've just been loving and soaking up and enjoying reading this past months.
That's fantastic. Tell us where we can find you online.
Sure. I'm at FionaDavis.net. That's my website with all the information, including all these events that are coming up. So I hope people can join me virtually as we talk about the book. And on Facebook, I'm Fiona Davis Author. And then Instagram, it's Fiona J. Davis, and the same as Twitter. And please join me. I love to interact with readers. It's so much fun.
Thank you, Fiona, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, or rate and review the show. This is the easiest way to support this podcast. Want to join a romance-loving community? Want weekly book recommendations, monthly author Q&As, and book recommendation meetups? Make new friends? Then join our Patreon community. To sign up, please follow the links in the show notes. What to Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts to love on frolic.media/podcast. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.